Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialize in websites for counselors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counselors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hello and welcome to episode 333 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and today I'm joined by a very special guest, an experienced counsellor who brings deep insight into therapy, neurodiversity and lived experience. Our autistic guest has chosen to remain anonymous, allowing for an open and honest conversation without the constraints of public identity. Together, we explore the unique strengths and challenges of being an autistic counsellor, how neurodivergence shapes therapeutic practice, and what the profession can learn about making therapy more inclusive. It's a rare opportunity to hear first-hand perspectives from an autistic practicing therapist. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And with that said, let's roll the intro.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to Counselling Tutor Podcast, episode 333, all the threes, 333. There it is. Sounds lucky. I'm Ken Kelly, and together with Rory Oakes, we're going to be walking you through three topics today, starting off with ethical sustainable practice, where we're going to be discussing the Dunning-Kruger Effect in trauma-informed therapy. We then go into practice matters, where we have a really special interview today. Rory had a chat with Daniela who is an autistic therapist. So stick around for that and hear that journey. We then recognize you, the students, on your formal journey as we're going to student services, and we're going to be speaking today about referencing work in your assignments. Well, glad to be here on this lucky 333 episode, Rory. Speaking about Dunning-Kruger Effect in trauma-informed therapy.
Yes, I came across this interesting psychological phenomenon when I was actually building a trauma-informed practice course. And it's a theory that was published in 1999 by Justin Kruger and David Dunning. They were social psychologists based in America. And the shortcut of the theory is the Dunning-Kruger effect states that people routinely overestimate their own performance in areas they lack competence, and they dismiss evidence that would prove them wrong. And the bizarre thing is that I think that I may have been affected by Dunning-Kruger effect. And let me tell you why. I graduated at the beginning of the 21st century. So I graduated in 2004, and I was taught by 20th century therapists or tutors who taught 20th century therapeutic ideas. I trained as a Rogerian therapist. And as I moved along my journey as a therapist, I began to realise there was holes in my knowledge, and that the story I had been told, that my therapeutic modality was, the necessary and sufficient conditions for therapeutic change, quite frankly, wasn't correct. And that was quite hard to take on board, to be honest, because, you know, I for those of regular listeners, you know how much stock I put in the world of Carl Rogers. And the reason for that was Rogers died, I think, in 1987. And trauma was only just beginning to be understood in about 4 or 5 years before he died. And as we moved into the 21st century, new theorists came along and taught us about trauma and trauma responses. And not long after I qualified, I did a trauma-informed practice course, and I realised just how much holes there were in my knowledge. And, you know, I'm not ashamed to admit this. When I went to this course, I thought to myself, oh, gosh, I wonder how much I'll learn. I wonder how much I'll learn because, you know, quite clearly, you know, I've got enough information. And it became very clear very quickly that I didn't. And I was very, very grateful for the course that I took and the ability to ingrain or embed trauma-informed practice within my modality. And here's the thing, and the thing that surprised me the most, I didn't need to change my modality. Being trauma-informed doesn't mean I have to practice a whole new load of interventions or practice in a different modality. It means that I'm informed. And I'll give you a little example from my practice life. Many years ago, after doing this course, I had a client who became disassociated quite badly in the therapy room. And I was able to use some of the information and the techniques I'd learned to be able to bring them back into the here and now. And I was ever so grateful of knowing that knowledge. And so was the client, because if I hadn't have been able to do that, the client may well have become quite unwell. So Dunning-Kruger is where we believe that we're experts in things, that we know that, you know, what we know is necessary and sufficient, I guess. And we find out that it's not. And I think it's something that every therapist should take on board in their journey from graduating through the arc of their practice, not to be too wedded to theories, Ken.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it's a cognitive bias, the Dunning-Kruger effect. I was surprised when I did the research on this that it was only kind of published in 1999. It's obviously been plaguing humanity since the dawn of time. And it's an interesting cognitive bias that we all hold. And the thing about a cognitive bias is you can't see it. It doesn't show itself. It's hidden to self. Unless you kind of read about it and learn about it, and then we can look for our own cognitive biases. I want to share a little bit of the study overview because I think it really paints what the Dunning-Kruger effect is and how there are two sides to the coin in the Dunning-Kruger effect. So the study overview was done at Cornell University, and it was, as you said, it was Dunning and Kruger conducting this experiment, as it were. And what they did was they tested the participants on different learning skills, and they were logical reasoning, grammar, and humor. Now, here's the findings. The key findings were that the least competent participants, because obviously they did these tests, so they got marked, the least competent of the participants significantly overestimated their performance or what they thought they would get. So you're talking about those that fell within the bottom 25% of scores in this test were putting themselves at 60 to 80% when they were rating how they felt that they did this. Now, the interesting thing is those that scored highly and did really well on the test, they underestimated how they had done on it. So there's the double side of it. And it's kind of, I know, Rory, you are a trauma-informed therapist. You've done you've done training in trauma. You've taught trauma at practice level. But I'm sure you would not say, I am now an expert. And that's because you know so much more. And the more we know we don't know. I'm sure you don't go, well, I'm not buying any more trauma books now because I know everything there is to know about trauma. And I
No.
think that's the other side of the Dunning-Kruger effect, is that when we do know something about it, we know what we don't know, and that's when we dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And you're absolutely correct. Since doing that course, I spent a lot of time with new ideas in treating trauma, how trauma manifests itself, what causes trauma. I mean, it was quite interesting when I did my presentation at college all those years ago. It was on trauma, and at the time, the thought was that it was only huge events like wars. I did mine on the massive explosion at Union Carbide plant in Bhopal, I think it was, many years ago. And the thinking at the time was that it was massive events. It was massive traumatic events, air crashes, wars, that type of thing. And now we know so much more, and we're seeing that trauma appears in our lives quite regularly, and it can affect us. It can affect our thinking. So you're absolutely right, Ken. I guess when I did my trauma course, I thought, well, I'm going to know about trauma now. It just taught me, apart from a few ideas and some overviews and some little techniques that can be used in certain circumstances, also taught me that the learning never stops, that it's a continuum. And it seems to me that every few months there's some new information that comes out about trauma. It's so impossible. It's incredible. But here's the thing. When I remember sitting in my class all those years ago, in the very first copy of Person-Centered Counselling Action, which I think was written by the late Pete Saunders, he actually taught in that very early edition, taught two situations where what happened when he thought he was an expert. One, I think, was when he was trying to repair a roof, and he eventually didn't have a great consequence. The other, hilariously, was when he thought he could operate a motorboat, and he put it into forward and ended up going backwards.
Oh dear!
And yes, and he said that's the thing, when you think you're an expert, that's where you can set yourself up for a bit of a fall. So yes. It was kind of alluded to in the literature that I read, but as I said, I was taught 20th century theory. And interestingly enough, I did a Facebook poll recently, asked 100 people how much information they were taught about trauma on their courses, or was it enough to be able to work in a trauma-informed way. 100 people responded, and only seven of those people said they got enough information. Yeah. 93 said they hadn't. So, with great respect to tutors, great respect to course boards, I don't think it's being taught. I think we're still teaching 20th century ideas.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we're learning the theories, and we're learning the basic skills to become a counsellor. But it makes sense then that is the core training. And onto that core training, we're ethically called upon to do continuing professional development. It's going to be in your ethical framework. We're speaking now Dunning-Kruger, and we're linking it to trauma-informed practice, but it applies to all elements of practice. It really does. And I guess as we go through the arc of our practice, we're always learning. We're always adding more knowledge. I think back to when I first went out into placement, and I giggle. I wonder how I actually managed, to be honest. But we do the best we can, and we're there in service. And the thing is, it's about the heart, isn't it? You bring your heart in, and you wanting to do to heal. You're wanting to be there with people that are struggling, but adding in the knowledge, learning the theory and the mechanisms beyond the core training are so important. And there's a little handout that's going to go along with what we're talking about today. So we're linking this Dunning-Kruger. You don't know what you don't know. We have a tendency to maybe overestimate that we may know what we don't know. And when we really know something really well, we may underestimate our knowledge of that, also known as imposter syndrome. That comes when you know something really well. It's almost like we can't win as humans. We're always on the end of some cognitive bias. But why we're linking it to this, and I know why you brought it, Rory, is because with trauma, it can be damaging. So misinterpreting trauma responses through assuming can be not just not serving to the client. It can actually do damage. Overestimating our own ability to handle a complex trauma situation, and the client going there because we're leading that way, and then finding themselves in difficulty and us not knowing why that happened or how that happened or what to do within that situation, and causing harm, really, which is the opposite to what all of us go into this for. So it can be a tricky area, and I think that's why it's really worth just focusing on this topic today.
Absolutely, Ken. And I think it might be worth considering, if you need additional training, maybe you feel a bit unsure about how to respond to trauma disclosures, how to work with that. You might notice that clients become dysregulated in sessions. You might find them staring into the middle distance, or, it's not unusual for adult clients to start talking like children as they are catapulted back in time to where the trauma was. Struggle to differentiate between trauma responses and personality traits. Is this a trauma response, or is this just how the person is? And crucially, absolutely crucially, feel emotionally drained or triggered by trauma narratives. Our work is good work. We do good work. We do it for the right reasons. But I think occasionally we might just deny the impact on self. And as a consequence of that, it can limit our working lives or just damage us emotionally. And I think that, thinking about trauma-informed training can be a great service to yourself as much as it can be to other people, Ken.
Yeah, very much so, Rory. And, when I look back to my understanding of trauma before looking deeper into the topic, my understanding of trauma was just my basic understanding of trauma was misconceived. I thought trauma was the event the person went through. So the person, I'm just going to use an example here. The person had a car accident, and that was the trauma. And of course, that's not the trauma. That is the event that happened. The trauma is what is carried in the body and how that shows itself and manifests outside of that event. And that can not be seen, and sometimes not even linked back to I had a car accident. It may just be I get so emotionally charged and anxious when I drive, and I don't really know why that is. The actual event can be so separate to the presentation. And we're dealing with trauma all the time. We've said this so many times. When a client comes into the therapy room, one thing we know we're going to see is trauma, responses from trauma. And not being able to recognize that, see it, and work with that within the room is I guess we're only going halfway there. I know you spent a lot of time building the course out for our trauma-informed practice, and you've guided a number of practitioners through that course. And I remember when you were putting that course together, one of the things that you insisted on was that it would not be a video course where you sit there and watch some videos of you delivering some theory. That added into that, there was going to be a live element where people could kind of delve deeper, speak about the topics that are learned, and have that group learning. And my question is, what do you think is the most significant change or difference that is reported back? Because I know you ask for feedback on all of your courses with every single student. What are people saying that they, at the end, that they didn't know at the beginning, Rory?
Well, to answer your question, Ken, I think that people who finish the course just know so much more, and they're so much more informed, but crucially, they realise how much they still don't know. And that gives them the window to be able to go out and keep being informed about trauma, because it is changing, it's ever changing. There's new ideas, new theories that are coming out, new perspectives, certainly in areas of minorities. We talk in the course about the dual burden effect for minorities, and how it impacts on minorities, areas that people just really hadn't thought of, and being more confident in their practice, being more replete, I guess, and I guess in terms of Dunning-Kruger effect, they realise that there's more to learn. They even when they graduate the course, a lot of the graduates, most of them, to be honest, say, "Oh, I'm going to look into this a bit more. I'm going to get some more books, maybe do some more CPD, maybe speak to my supervisor." So it's always on their mind to refresh, find out, and gain more knowledge, which is in service of clients. That's the key thing, in service of clients.
Yeah, bingo is what I'm going to say there. Rory's created a super duper handout. I'm going to read the conclusion from that handout. Being a trauma-informed therapist requires ongoing learning and self-awareness. By acknowledging the hazards of the Dunning-Kruger effect, therapists can remain open to growth, ensuring that they can provide ethical and effective care for trauma survivors. Investing in training isn't just beneficial, it's essential. So you can get that handout from today's topic by going to Counselling Tutor. That's counsellingtutor.com. Click on the podcast tab, find episode 333. That's an easy one to remember, and it's right there. You can download it from that very page. If you're interested in becoming a trauma-informed practitioner and you're interested in our training, same place, counsellingtutor.com. All our products and our courses are there. And that is today's ethical, sustainable practice. So moving on, and we're going to Practice Matters now, Rory. I love Practice Matters because it's where we have the interviews of experts in the field. And today an interesting one, because you beautifully introduced us at the top of the podcast, an autistic therapist, Rory.
Yes, Ken. And we know that autism is a rising cohort of people who are autistic, and this interview I think is really important. I think it brings hope to those people who may think, well, I couldn't be a counsellor or a psychotherapist because I'm autistic, and I think it gives great insight into the mindset of one autistic therapist. Remember, I always say, when you met one autistic person, you met one autistic person. But I think it gives a really strong flavour of what it's like to be an autistic therapist. So we caught up with Daniela, and this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
We live in a time where we're witnessing the emergence of a previously overlooked and often misunderstood cohort of people. For years, neurodivergent individuals, particularly autistic people, have been misdiagnosed, mislabeled, and even excluded from specific roles due to outdated and stereotypical ideas about neurodivergence. Today, I'm joined by Danielle, an anonymous autistic therapist. Together, we'll explore what it's like to navigate the world of therapy as an autistic professional, the challenges, the strengths, and the changes needed in the profession to foster true inclusivity. This is a conversation you don't want to miss. So, Danielle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Rory.
Now, you very kindly reached out on social media. We had a conversation on social media. And one of the things that you said about being on the podcast is that you'd be anonymous, so we wouldn't publish your full name. Why is it that you wanted to be anonymous? What kind of drove you to having anonymity?
I think mainly because I can't guarantee that some of my clients wouldn't listen to this podcast. And I think it really helps clients, if they do find your podcast, to understand things from a counsellor perspective. So I wouldn't be adverse to them, listening. They might recognise my voice, but I'd rather them know me as they know me as Danielle rather than my full name, so that I've got some protection for myself in terms of my personal life.
Yes, and I guess that's understandable. I'm sure that the listener would understand that, and we wouldn't want clients to out themselves, and we wouldn't want to out therapists either. So that's very understandable. So first of all, thank you for joining us. I think this is an important conversation because we talk a lot about working with autism and autistic clients, yet very little said about our therapists who are autistic. So my first question is, when did you discover you're autistic?
I have always felt different from my peers, probably since the age of 4, 5, first going into education. But I grew up in the 90s, so things like autism and ADHD, etc., weren't as well known as they are now. I really started to explore kind of feeling different from others when I worked with an autistic client. We just really had this understanding, like a level of relationship that was we just got each other very, very well. And it was kind of surprising to me, because when the client disclosed they were autistic, I thought, I need to do a lot of CPD on this. I need to kind of understand what autism is and what that means for individuals. I know that everybody who is autistic is individual, but kind of having an understanding of autism in and of itself can be helpful to work with autistic clients. But as I was doing this research, I was like, this sounds like me. I can identify myself in some of these areas. And I went for things that are more female specific, because autism in women can be quite a bit different from males. So yeah, I really started to understand that, this might be me. I might be autistic too. And then started the journey of kind of speaking to my GP and going on the assessment pathway.
And I presume that you've gone down the assessment pathway, or are you still waiting for the assessment?
I had my assessment last June, so June 2024, and I was diagnosed as autistic level 1. I think in past terms that would have been like Asperger's syndrome or high functioning, but I really think those terms are outdated. And actually, I just prefer to say I'm autistic. I don't believe in the levels either.
Yes, and I think it's interesting that you've shared your journey, because that is pretty much the same journey I went on. I did some training, and when I was going through the training, I thought, that sounds a bit familiar, and yes, that sounds like the kind of things I do. And I too had an assessment, and the outcome of that assessment was that I almost certainly have ADH. We're dropping the D today. We're dropping the disorder with attention deficit issues, and also that if I'd been diagnosed as a child, almost certainly they would have diagnosed me as autistic. So, it's an interesting journey. In terms of being a therapist, what was the impact of the assessment on you? How did you feel, I guess, when your suspicions, if you like, were confirmed?
I went in anticipating that I'd feel some sort of relief. I mean, before that, I had massive kind of doubt. I was like, no, I'm not autistic. They're going to say, no, this isn't you, which I found can be quite something that is normal for people who are neurodiverse and kind of want or need that piece of paper or authority to say, no, you're right, this is you, like reassurance. So when I got my diagnosis, I thought, oh, I'm going to feel relieved that I can put these doubts to bed. I didn't anticipate that. So I was in my early 30s when I got diagnosed. I didn't anticipate the amount of kind of grief I would feel, being told I was autistic and kind of reflecting on my life and how actually, if I would have been diagnosed as a child, I wouldn't have maybe had as many challenges in my life, or that I would have understood myself better, been able to advocate for myself a bit better. So I think I felt a lot of grief. I, had to kind of recognize that is something that took over my headspace. And luckily, I've got a very supportive employer and could recognize that my counselling work wasn't impacted by that. But in my admin time, I'd kind of keep to myself while I'm still processing these things. And I had my own personal therapy and had supervision as well. So remained ethical at that time too.
Yes, I mean, it's not unusual, I think, for people who, certainly in later life, who have a diagnosis or assessment to look back along the timeline of their life and sometimes mourn parts of their life where had been recognised as neurodivergent or autistic, their lives may have been a lot easier. I know that was my journey. My school journey was absolutely horrendous. And in those days they tried to beat the maths into you, which isn't a very good pedagogical approach, really. As a teacher myself, it's not one I recommend for learning. But we live in different times. It's a long time ago, and I realised that the teachers and the educators had no concept of neurodivergence or autism. They just saw someone who was, a disobedient child, if you like. But it does take a little bit of resetting the timeline and looking backwards. And I guess that's what you had to engage with to kind of make sense of your life with this new information.
Definitely. I think as well, I hadn't appreciated how much I had been, still do a little, but I'm getting better, but masking my kind of ways of being. Like I like certain temperatures and certain textures, and I hate ticking clocks. So all of these things that I just kind of not really put two and two together, that I was just putting up with, I could say, you know what, I actually don't like this. Can we change it? And the answer was yes, we can change it. We can make this environment better for you to work in, more comfortable. And that helps me to unmask and really understand myself as an autistic person and as a counsellor as well. It's about being congruent as well.
Absolutely. So now you can get your needs met. You can voice where you are, and you talked about, the ticking clock, maybe temperatures. Temperatures is a big one for me. And you can now find a voice and say, I'm not happy with that. Can something be done? And things are being changed for you, which is incredible. Now, in terms of masking, and I know when we talk about masking, we also need to think about the spoons. And for those of people who are not sure about what spoons are, they're basically energy levels. It's like the battery levels on a battery. Yeah. You press a button on some things, it shows you the battery level, like on your phone, for instance. And masking. Well, maybe just explain what masking is to you. I think that would be really helpful. When you talk about masking from your perspective, what is it?
So the ways I've understood that I was masking is that I try to do things like maintain eye contact with clients. That's something I learned in my training as a counsellor, that's what you do to demonstrate that you're listening, that you're attending to a client. That's really uncomfortable for me. I tend to look around the room and spend some time, like I fidget as well. So I kind of twizz around my engagement and wedding ring. But I used to try and stop myself from doing that because I didn't want the client to think that I was distracted or getting impatient with them. It's something now that I kind of invite clients to ask about if they want to. I've kind of had a lot of support with supervision and things like that regarding self-disclosure about being autistic. And it's something that, unless it's for the client's benefit, I don't feel I need to do that for myself. They can ask me if they like, but it's not something I lead with. And I think that is also something that I would have not thought about before. Like, almost I can't unveil this part of myself or my being to a client because they might have, misconceptions or their own feelings and views about autistic people. And would that affect how they see me as a counsellor? So I think learning to kind of understand the places where I was masking and understand that that is what it is as masking really helps me to become my authentic self.
Yes.
And to work with a client authentically.
So, when you talk about this masking, the eye contact thing is an interesting one. Because when I taught, I used to say, be aware that some clients might not like eye contact, and also consistent eye contact can be a bit scary for people.
Mm-hmm.
And also, the moving of your wedding ring. I mean, to suppress that would take, I guess, a lot of energy. And when we talk about the spoons, that's the energy levels that autistic people have. That's sometimes how it's described. And by suppressing who you are, it uses a lot of energy, and it can leave people at the end of the working day just completely exhausted or zonked out. Would that be your experience?
Definitely, Rory. I would get, after a day of counselling, I'd get home and I would fall asleep on the sofa, and it wasn't immediately obvious to me that it was because I'd been masking. I thought I had low iron. I thought I needed to change my diet. But actually I'd run out of spoons. I couldn't maintain a level of energy that was required to do my working day and then fulfill things in my personal life. I mean, very, very fortunately, I have an amazing, supportive, encouraging employer, fantastic people. They really help me to have more balance in my work and personal life by doing reasonable adjustments. So I can not have a ticking clock in my room. I can work the hours that work for me. I'm a morning person, so I have more energy at the start of a day rather than towards the end of a day. And they've really, really support me to feel appreciated and valued in that space. And I know that I'm very lucky because, unfortunately, that is not some neurodiverse workers, never mind counsellors, experience.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's very progressive thinking by your organisation, and they should be congratulated for that. And you're absolutely correct. A lot of employers still see some areas of diversity as to be celebrated, and some areas of diversity not to be even discussed, and that gives quite a conflict to people. Part of their identity is celebrated and accepted and seen, and other parts of their identity is either not discussed or, quite frankly, treated quite punitively, because they say, well, you're not fitting in, or you're not you're not being part of the team, and that can be because some people are neurodivergent. They interact differently to others. In terms of clients, and I think there'll be a lot of therapists. I think there's going to be a lot of autistic therapists listening to this. No pressure, Danielle. How have clients reacted to you encouraging them to ask or to be curious about you and the self-disclosure?
Clients, I've understood, they're there for their own purposes. So they're not there to necessarily know everything about me, but I think that strengthens the relationship between a counsellor and a client when they feel they can ask about the things that I do. Maybe they see them as quirks or things that, I do to keep myself present. But I say, I invite you to ask about things where you may see me tapping my feet or, playing with my wedding ring or looking around the room. Like, please ask me about that. I'm happy to share what's going on, but it's in your interest and I'm not going to make that a pressing issue. It's an invitation you don't have to accept. Because we are human. I'm not a robot. I don't, sit in that space with the client and not have to also attend to my own needs. I am also a human being in that space. So I think having that kind of space with the client to say, I invite you to ask about these things, gives us both a comfortable space that I don't have to feel I need to mask and hide my stim behavior. And it's not going to be an issue for the client that they can't ask about it. It creates a trusting place where I invite questions to be asked.
Yes, absolutely. And have clients pursued that and been curious and asked you about, your neurodivergent way of being?
Yes, it's usually, in my experience, the clients that also maybe feel they might be neurodivergent. Some clients have really, been quite surprised that I'm autistic because I get the classic, oh, you don't look autistic kind of thing. But I think that helps, dissipate some of their views and their misconceptions about autism because, okay, I don't look autistic, but I do have a diagnosis and, this is how I present as a counsellor. Is that an issue for you? I think it's healthy to have these conversations with clients because they're coming with a whole lot of things that may not be the presenting issue.
Yes.
They've got all their own thoughts and judgments and views about different things that go on in the world. So I think in some instances where the counsellor is, breaking down some of those perhaps negatively held views, there's power in that,
Yes, and there's a very powerful sense of reality, isn't there? That you're working with a human being, you're sitting with another human being, and if I can be myself, then it's okay for you to be yourself as the client. I think that modelling is so important. I've always wanted to ask, and more for my own curiosity, Danielle, do you think that being autistic gives you any enhanced capabilities as a therapist?
I do, because I think the misconception I've come across is that autistic people can't empathize. But actually, I empathize to a heightened degree. I am in those feelings with my clients. And it's a very precious place to be. Thinking about the spoons, it can be quite, tiring, but it creates that special level of empathy with the client. I think as well, creatively, I'm open to clients who can't verbalize how they're feeling, opening that up. Is there a color that you kind of attribute to that feeling? I open up the space. I don't leave it in that void of you must tell me how you're feeling. Well, let's draw it or kind of work with another medium that would be helpful for you. So I think I've got an understanding that not everybody is the same and people have different needs, and I'm attuned to that. So yeah, I think I have some like strengths, not enhancements, but like strengths.
All right, we'll go for enhancements, and it seems that is along the lines of creativity in the work, and offering different directions or different ways of working with a client. And that sounds really in service of clients, because not every client will want one way of working, one approach. Being creative, I think, is really important. As we come to the end of this interview, what would your words or observations be to those who may be listening, who are either thinking of training and know they're autistic, or those already training and may be fearful about disclosing their autism either to their employers or doing what you've done, being transparent with clients? What would you say to them?
I understand the fear aspect of it, because when you are autistic and maybe you've been masking for all of your life, asking someone to be congruent can be quite confronting. But actually, it's an opportunity to know yourself. And when you can come from a place where you know yourself as a counsellor, you don't need to be like Carl Rogers or anybody else. You can be you. That's what congruence is. Whether you're autistic, ADH, like you are you, and that's congruence. I think disclosing to clients and employers is a very individual decision, because some people may feel benefits of masking. They might prefer to mask in certain situations. And I think that should be appreciated. I think for people who want to start to unmask, it's about having that conversation with your employer, and where that's not understood, maybe getting some support externally. So with organisations like Access to Work, who help people with mental health issues and disabilities to work comfortably in their organisations.
Well, I'm a great believer in the words of the philosopher Terence, who said, "I am human, nothing human is alien to me." And I think in the pursuit of, certainly therapy and working at relational depth, being yourself, there's no better service to a client. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I want to just kind of acknowledge your courage in this. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of other people listening to this who will be inspired by our discussion today. And, as someone who's neurodivergent, I have to say that speaking about it and being honest about it and being who you are is so important, but can, I understand, be challenging. So, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us.
And a massive thank you to you, Rory, for holding those all-important discussions. And if you listen to that and you think, you know what, I'm interested in learning more about autism, working with autistic clients, we have a wonderful training course, Autistic Informed Therapist course in Counselling Tutor. Just go to counsellingtutor.com. I am proudly autistic and was a counsellor for many, many years before I stepped into training and counselling tutor. So, speaking about training, we now go into student services. Student services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Can't tell you how many times Rory and I have heard counselling students say that learning skills and knowing that they're using them effectively is really, really challenging. The reason for this is because we don't get to see another counsellor using skills in a real live session. In reality, this means that we're asked to learn something that we can never see demonstrated in a real setting. And it's no wonder that many of us are left feeling unsure. If you want to see counselling skills used in real sessions by qualified therapists, so this is real sessions, real presentations, and real use of skills, then go to counselingskillsacademy.com. There's some free videos on skills, including a full live session that you can have a look at. Gain the competence and the confidence of knowing you're using your counselling skills effectively. Just visit counselingskillsacademy.com. And today we're speaking about, I guess, a hurdle that we all have to jump over, and that is referencing in assignments. It's going to be interesting to see where you go with this, Rory, because I've got some different thoughts than I would have had if we'd been having this chat maybe a year ago.
Yes, well, I mean, it is still sends a shiver down my spine when I think of referencing, because it takes me back to my student days, and of course, it's a completely different way of writing. If you're writing an academic essay, you're asked to reference it, and the reason you're asked to reference is to show the information that you have argued your points against. So I don't know if many of you may know University Challenge. It's a competition between universities here in the UK where there's a panel of students, undergraduates, and they compete against each other. And they always introduce themselves by saying, "My name is," and they give the name, and they say, "I am reading philosophy or mathematics or neuroscience," or whatever they're studying. And the key here is reading. And what assignments ask you to do is look at the topic that you're being asked to discuss or to critically analyse, read about it, and then bring that reading into the assignment as well as your own views, as you know, how it applies to practice or how it applies to how you view the world. And you have to cite that reading. In other words, you have to cite the book. And it's a very, very specific way of doing it. So it can be quite tricky for students because they've not written like that before. And a lot of assignments come back because the referencing isn't correct, or people have referenced Wikipedia, which you should never reference because it's sometimes not very accurate. And it can give students a bit of a headache, I think, Ken.
Yes, indeed. And there are many different types of referencing. So it's a good idea to find out what type of referencing you're being asked for if you are writing an assignment. My daughter is doing her master's at the moment, and she wrote a paper as part of her degree work that is now going through for publication. So she's very happy to have her name on a published paper. But what was interesting, I wanted to look over it. I'm a proud dad. And when I had a look over it, there's more references in the paper than anything else. When you get down to the bottom, it's massively referenced. And that's how academia works. You know, we're always looking for what's new, where can we push this narrative forward. And in order to do that, we need to look at the work that's already been done so that that we can build upon that. And we need to give credit to the people who did that work previous to us. And that's where referencing comes in. It becomes this whole spider web that you'll follow one reference to another paper that will also reference another paper that will also reference another paper. And it's how academia pays homage to those that did the work beforehand. So it depends what level of study you're at, what you might be referencing. If you're at degree and higher, you're going to be referencing academic papers, maybe, as well as books. You might be looking at journals, research journals, and the like. If you are on a lower level, you might just be referencing your recommended reading. But I think what is important here is that you can reference that is outside of the books. So you can reference something that you found on a website if it is, like you say, Rory, not Wikipedia, but a website that has gravitas, that would be seen as an authority site in that field or topic. You can reference this podcast. This podcast is referenceable. You can reference digital media, I guess, is what I'm saying there. You can, anything else you can reference, Rory? I'm just thinking now.
Yeah, TV programs, radio programs, films, newspapers, anything that will sort of reinforce your argument. And I think the key here is having a mix. It's not just a case of going onto a search engine and just typing in the question and referencing every single every single website that comes up. It's about really planning out what you're going to reference. So in other words, if you're referencing Carl Rogers' 19 propositions, you may very well want to start with the book it was in, which is Client-Centered Therapy. You may want to start with that, read around that chapter. So as I always say, we know the book, it's Client-Centered Therapy. You don't have to read the whole book. What you do is you just go into the index at the back, look at the 19 propositions, find the page they're on or the chapter they're in, read that chapter, and then get some sense of it. And, I think you always start, or I would recommend you start with the definitive work that someone's done. So if you're asked to, I don't know, if you're asked, say, for the 19 propositions, I think it would be a pretty weak assignment if you didn't actually cite Carl Rogers, the person who actually wrote them or came up with them, and the book it came out of, because that proves to the person who's marking your assignment that you're reading the definitive article. You're going to the absolute source. Then after that, if you wanted to talk about maybe our more contemporary views of it, then your reading then expands a little bit wider, and you can bring in other people who may take, a different view after 50 years or have a different perspective. And of course, it all depends on what the question asks you. If you're asked to explain the 19 propositions, it's a different proposition. You see what I did there? It's a different proposition to critically evaluating them, because, if you're critically evaluating, you're going to be asked for deeper thinking, and your reference base is going to probably be a lot wider. So the key things for me is, first of all, find out from your tutor what they expectations, and where, there's obviously going to be a reading list. So I would imagine that when someone produces a reading list, there's an expectation that the reading list is going to be referenced at some level. And just ask the tutor what kind of references they're looking for, and trying to get a sense of what the tutor wants, manage those expectations. But I would always say start with a definitive source first and work your way outwards, as a rough guide to referencing.
Yeah, nice. So that's a great way of kind of looking at the hierarchy of referencing. And of course, you can, just looking at the media that you can reference, you can also reference a handout you might have been handed by your course tutor on that topic as well. But like you say, that handout itself should be referencing the material that it came from. There is a hurdle here, and it's a hurdle that can often seem difficult, and it can trip you up, and it's how the reference is written. So the reference has to be written in a very specific format. And I started this by saying, find out what kind of referencing you are asked to do, because there isn't just one style of referencing. There's a number of different styles of referencing. I know, Rory, you recently did some work in a book where you had to go to a very specific style of referencing, and you needed to go and look that up and understand what it was asking you for. So make sure you understand the style of the reference that you need to write. And then if you go and Google that style of referencing, you'll be surprised at how many universities will provide tools where you can actually put in the content that you're referencing, the book name, and it'll ask you for questions like when was it published and who is the author, and then you can click a little button and it'll give you the reference done. These are little tools that a lot of universities have. And as we went into this topic, I said maybe my thinking on this would be different to if we'd spoken a year ago. One of the things I would do now is I would turn to AI, not to generate the reference, but to help me format the reference. So I would say, I've been asked to do Havard referencing on this book by this person on this thing. Is there anything I'm missing? What information do you need? Because AI is pretty sharp at just giving you the format to reference. What was your experience in working in a reference outside of that we used when we were tutoring, Rory?
Well, when I wrote the reference for the book, the chapter that I contributed, I had to write it in APA 7. And I used a number of things to help me with that. I because I'm proudly dyslexic, I need a little bit of help, and thankfully there's a lot of help around now, digital help. And I used Grammarly. And Grammarly was very useful because it formatted in APA 7 for me. But I was very, very careful I think I wrote to the editors and asked them first what was the format that was needed. Could you give me some examples? And also, I also had I wrote for Routledge, and Routledge, I had some Routledge books, so I could go into them and see what other authors had done. And it was interesting. I used AI on a couple of occasions, and sometimes it was the same, sometimes it was just subtly different. So I think that it's really useful. If I was back at university or college again, I would ask the tutor, can you give me an example of the referencing? Universities do it brilliantly. All you have to do is go onto your university website and type in referencing, and they'll produce a reference. In fact, the other day I was in our loft here at Counselling Towers in the atrium, and I found my daughter's degree work that she'd left with us. And going through it, I discovered a laminated sheet from Manchester Metropolitan University with referencing on. They gave it out at the time she was doing it and said, this is what the referencing should look like. This is how you do it. So I would be inclined to manage the expectations of your tutor and the academic establishment. But Ken's absolutely right. AI can be so useful in just getting a sense of what a reference should look like, especially if you're referencing something that isn't on that sheet, so a newspaper or a video. And the other thing is, with referencing, we have to remember the real reason for referencing is so someone can look at a paper and check what is being spoken about and quoted in the literature that's being referenced. That's the idea. It's so that you can have everything we do as we move through academia from level 2 right up to, being a PhD. The idea is that we can argue our point and we can defend it by the research that we've done, and other people can look at that and say, this is the research they've done, this is where they've drawn from, and then they can generate either a critique or they could generate a counter view. And that is how we learn. We don't learn by saying, well, I've done my PhD, that's it, that's the definitive article. That is just one step to, as we said at the top of the podcast, to learning again. What's written now may not be correct in 18 months or 2 years' time. So it's really important that referencing is used to be able to look at the validity and the quality of what's being researched.
Very much so. Yeah, that is such an important part of referencing, the ability for another to go and look at that reference and see that information is in fact there. So I could write a lovely paper for my assignment on Carl Rogers and say that he really loved his peanut butter sandwiches. But that could be me making it up. But if I can then reference maybe a article or something where he was interviewed and he says, "Oh, I love peanut butter sandwiches." Hey, there you go. Now I'm all right, as long as I can reference it and somebody can go and have a look at that. It's no secret that we run the Counselling Study Resource, which is a library for students that are undertaking formal training. And within that library, we've got tons and tons of lectures and resources on the topics that you'll study while you're busy doing your formal counselling training, the theory, the practice side of things, the skill side of things. And often we get people saying, how do I reference this? And if you look at, and if you are a member of our library or any of our resources, go and have a look at any of the resources, any of the lectures. The references are always there for you. We give you the references. We give you the references that the information is taken from. So you couldn't write about Carl Rogers' 19 propositions and then say that you got that information from the Counselling Tutor website. Well, you could, but we're not the originators of that. But if you go and download one of our handouts on 19 propositions, it will say underneath it where that all originated from. So follow those references down. Anything else on referencing, Rory?
Yes. I mean, as I say, I wrote in MPA. There's Harvard. There's a plethora of different referencing styles. So it's really important to work out which referencing you're being asked for. And also, and I'm sure lots of tutors will be thankful for me mentioning this, when you do your referencing in the at the end of your assignment where you write your references, try to do them in alphabetical order, because it's a lot easier for the tutor to go through and see where you've referenced. Always put your references in separately. In other words, where you've got that information from, because that makes the tutor's life easier. And of course, things like references. Oh, yes, the other thing is, word counts and references. Check with your tutor if the references form part of the word count. So if your assignment's 3,000 words and you're referencing heavily, you could eat that word count up very, very quickly and find you've not got enough word count left to be able to put your own ideas in or to be able to write about what you're being asked to do. So check with your tutor usually, and this isn't the definitive source by any stretch of the imagination. Usually quotes and references don't include in the word counts, but ask your tutor, because it references and quotes from literature can take up a big chunk of your assignment. And I've seen students do that. They've included them in the word count, even though we used to ask not to. And it's a bit thin. The assignment was thin. It was just basic. I had one assignment. It was an assignment just of quotes from books, which was lovely, but I couldn't see the student's idea in that, where what ideas they were formulating. I couldn't see the thinking behind what they were writing. And it was purely because they'd populated the assignment and eaten up the word count with references and quotes. And they had to go back and redo it again, sadly. So yeah, always check with your tutor, manage those expectations, and once you've got that information, you shouldn't go too far wrong. And ask if they've got any exemplar assignments. They may give you an assignment not from counselling, but maybe a different discipline. So it wouldn't be unusual to go into a library and find a master's degree dissertation on something, and you can see how it's referenced. It's worth spending the time, because it cuts down on resubmissions and ultimately disappointment. No one likes to be disappointed, do they?
Yeah, and references do trip us up. They just do. And, important takeaways. Ask your tutor, as Rory has said. And we have mentioned AI twice in this chat, because it's prevalent, and there are many learning institutions that now reckon that AI is okay for certain parts of an academic journey, but check with your learning institution. Don't just say, "Oh, Rory and Ken said that I can check my referencing on AI." And to be clear, We're not saying that AI generates the reference. We're saying you feed the information in and it helps you construct that. But check with your learning institution if that is allowed. And if you're using AI for anything, it should be referenced. You really should reference it. I know that is the thinking at university level anyway. This has been episode 333 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started off with ethical sustainable practice, and we talked of the Dunning-Kruger Effect, not knowing what we don't know, and informing ourselves on our journey of therapeutic practice in service of our clients. Moving on to Practice Matters, interview with Danielle, an interview with an autistic therapist, gaining the perspective of one autistic therapist's view on being a practitioner. Very insightful, and we do thank Danielle for giving us this interview, because I think it was very brave of her, so we thank her for that. And then inter-student services, the thorny issue of referencing in assignments, what to do, how to manage expectations, and as Ken has spoken, how to use AI to be able to help you in that quest. We'd like to thank you for your support and your subscriptions and your shares. They mean the world to us when people share across on LinkedIn or Facebook. It's lovely to see that people take our podcast to their hearts. So until next time, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.